Now, there are challenges that are internal to airlines. If you are cost inefficient, if you have your network designed poorly, if you don't invest in IT and don't outsource the right level of services, try to do everything in-house, which is not cost efficient, then you are obviously bound to not make money. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to it. But in addition to internal measures that the airlines can take, there are a lot of external factors that also impact the industry, like we discussed. I mean, you do whatever. If the crude oil is $130, I think there is no way you can make money.
Welcome to the Blue Circle, an exclusive keynote address for our members. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone, and our distinguished keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom were CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for industry professionals that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, renewable energy, aviation, defense, logistics, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for industry professionals, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across all our sectors. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Amit Thakran. He's an associate practice lead at CAPA. He has extensive experience in consulting and research assignments across the aviation and tourism value chain. The nature of these engagements has included aviation market studies, technical advisory for capital raising, commercial and strategic advisory services to airlines, airports, bid advisory, developing business plans for aviation stakeholders, airline restructuring, and many more. And for today's topic, Mr. Thakran will be discussing the outlook for Indian aviation. Now I request Mr. Thakran to please begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome for this call. Like Gautam said, I'll be talking about the outlook for Indian aviation on CAPA India's behalf. Just give me a second, I'll share my screen so that you can view the presentation. Gautam, is my screen visible?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you once again, Blue Circle, Gautam, for inviting us, and the audience and participants for having me here. Over next 15-20 minutes, I'll be presenting CAPA India's views on Indian aviation outlook. But before I do that, I will briefly introduce CAPA India. We have been established 19 years ago, and our main business is providing a comprehensive suite of advisory and research services for the aviation, aerospace, and travel industry. During this period, we have done more than 700 projects, and currently we have a team of more than 65 plus full-time consultants with us. And we are planning to expand this to about 100 people over the next 1 year. We have these following services that we provide to our clients. We work on advisory services, custom research services that we offer to our aviation clients. We also have an innovation and research center, which aims to provide cutting-edge research and comprehensive data on global best practices and benchmarks. We have a dedicated digital transformation team, which delivers end-to-end digital transformation strategies for global aviation businesses. And we also have a transaction and capital advisory team. In terms of our client list within the aviation value chain, we have worked with large airlines, both Indian as well as global airlines. You can see on the screen, as well as the major airport operators, Indian as well as global operators. During the last 2 years, in addition to the research and consulting services that we have been offering during the COVID period, we did more than 30 webinars covering various research aspects of the industry, ranging from sustainable roadmap for Indian aviation, reinventing airline business model, airport business model, financing, green energy, regional aviation, etc., etc. Snippets of some of those webinars you can see on the screen. This year, we are targeting these topics in terms of research and industry-wide papers. Some of them include new approach to airline and airport business models, airline planning, airline ancillary revenue, etc. We recently released some of our executive briefing papers, which included outlook for crude oil prices, the hyper-competitive environment that is emerging in Indian aviation, and reshaping of Emirates post-COVID. And there are others planned this year as well. I briefly talked about our new initiatives. One is the Innovation and Research Center, which we have recently launched. The objective of the center is to be a thought leader in the reinvention of business models through research, data, and solutions. It delivers cutting-edge research and comprehensive data on global best practices, as well as Indian carriers. We also have a digital transformation practice, which aims to deliver end-to-end digital transformation and technology strategies for global aviation businesses. Coming to the agenda for today's presentation, I will briefly talk about a historical review of Indian aviation, then followed by a little more detailed review of FY22, the last financial year. Then I will present our outlook for next year, which is FY 2023, and then I will conclude my presentation with a few slides. So starting with the historical review, I think most of us would already know that Indian aviation has been growing at a very fast pace. It has seen exponential growth, but the growth has accelerated during last decade. So the number of passengers that we added in the previous 4 decades combined, we have added more number of passengers in the last 10 years itself. If we break down the historical review into a little more detail, basically if we focus on the last 15 years, that has been the major growth period for our Indian aviation, both in terms of domestic as well as international. The domestic traffic has grown, and I am talking about airport traffic, the number of passengers handled by Indian airports. The domestic traffic has grown at a staggering CAGR of about 14.5 percentage points. But if you look at the growth, or if you divide the growth between first 10 years, FY 2004 to FY 2014, the growth was a little, I wouldn't say muted, it was still significant, but the growth has accelerated during last 5-6 years. The major factors for this acceleration has been the push by the government. The government came up with the National Civil Aviation Policy in 2016. The airport privatization drive has been pretty significant over this period. The expansion of LCCs also supported the traffic growth. If you look at the international side, the growth was about 9% for the 15-year period, but the growth was a little muted during the last 5-6 years. And the reasons for that were, the Indian Airlines had limited capability for international expansion. Only one airline, if we exclude Jet Airways, because they were kind of slowing down their operations in FY18 and FY19, and they finally exited. So only Air India had wide-body aircraft for international expansion. But the primary reason for international market growing at a slower rate than domestic was the freeze on bilateral rights. So during last 6-7 years, the Indian government has taken a stand that we want Indian airlines to expand on international routes rather than international airlines or foreign airlines capturing our market. So they have not given any additional rights to foreign carriers, especially the sixth freedom carriers, to name a few the carriers such as Emirates, Turkish, Etihad, Singapore, etc. So what that has done is it has limited growth on some of our major markets such as Dubai, Doha, Singapore, and other Middle Eastern countries, and the traffic growth suffered as part of that. During the later course of my presentation, I will also talk about the outlook for both domestic and international traffic. Now, this was pre-COVID. I mostly talked about the period between 2004 to 2020, and then COVID happened, and we all were struggling. The entire aviation market, the industry was struggled a lot. So every year in June, we come up with CAPA India releases its outlook for next year. So this slide shows a snippet of what we said in June 2021 about FY 2022. So we had forecasted at that time that in FY 22, the domestic traffic will be in the range of 80 to 95 million, and international traffic will be in the range of 16 to 21 million. The actual outcome actually was almost in line with what we had said. The domestic traffic came out to 84.2 million, which is in the middle of our range, and the international traffic was slightly marginally higher than what we had forecasted. The stronger than expected recovery in international traffic actually happened because the Indian government took proactive initiatives in terms of signing bubble agreements, and the demand for international traffic recovered slightly faster than what we had estimated. Now, in terms of industry profitability, we had said that we project a loss of about $4 billion for the entire airline industry, which comprises about $2 billion by LCCs and about $2.1 billion by FSCs. The actual outcome has been less than what we had forecasted. So the actual current estimate of FY 2022 airline industry loss is about $3.3 billion, of which LCCs, I think, have reported are estimated to have lost about 1.5 billion, and FSCs have lost about 1.6 billion. Now, this is slightly lower than, the actual outcome is slightly lower than what we had estimated because, like I said, the international traffic recovery has been faster than our estimate. We said that at that time, Indigo will lose about 7,000 crores in FY 2022. The actual outcome was 6,200 crore, about 10 to 12% lower than our forecast. Air India also surprised us with slightly better performance. We had estimated about 12,000, but their actual reported FY 2022 loss was about 9,500 crore during the financial year. Now, during the year, with respect to traffic, the current slide shows how domestic air traffic moved during this period between Feb 2022, basically just before pre-COVID, to the latest month, which is August 2022. In terms of daily departing passengers, we all know there was a freeze in terms of air travel movement during the last week of March 20, and it remained like that for April, and then the market opened up in May. So after that, after the first wave, the industry, in terms of domestic traffic recovery, took about 10 months to reach the 65% recovery mark. And when I say 65% recovery, I am comparing this daily departure passenger with the pre-COVID daily departures. So we reached about 65%, and then the second wave started to impact our market, and we again went back to 64 departures a day. But the second wave had slightly lesser impact compared to first wave, and the industry also became a little more resilient in terms of recovery. So we took about 6 months from there to reach the 65% recovery mark. And then the third wave had, I wouldn't say little, it was still significant impact, but not as much as first and second wave. And we touched the 65% recovery mark within 2 months. By May 2022, we had the domestic traffic had recovered to more than 85%. But then after that, the seasonally weaker months started to hit, and our traffic again started to fall a little, but we are still strong in terms of domestic recovery. On the international front, the recovery was obviously muted for the initial part of the period, because most of our major international markets were closed and there was no international travel happening. In fact, in India also opened up the Indian international market in March 2022. That is the period when scheduled international airport operations were allowed. And after that, I think we have seen a pretty strong recovery, and we are at about 80% recovery compared to pre-COVID in terms of international as well. Now, finally, coming to the 2023 outlook, CAPA India's outlook for next year. So we expect the industry to have a domestic traffic of about 130 to 140 million, which is almost recovering to pre-COVID levels this financial year, with 60 to 65 million in the first half and 70 to 75 million in the second half of this financial year. Now, the airfares are slightly higher. If they keep going up, actually the actual outcome could be slightly lower than this. In terms of international traffic, we expect the traffic to be around 55 to 60 million, approximately 25 million we have seen, and 30 to 35 million we expect in the second half of this year. In terms of profitability, and I will talk more about it in subsequent slides, we expect the industry to lose about 1.5 billion this year, which is less than half of what they lost in the previous financial year, but still a significant loss. The major reasons for industry to still be in losses: we know that fuel is very high currently, currency also has depreciated, and otherwise also the operating environment remains challenging for the airline industry. And for this forecast, we have factored in crude oil prices at about $100 and currency at about 70 to 80 per USD average for the financial year. In terms of the fleet, we expect the industry closed financial year 2022 with 672 aircraft, 672 in service and inactive aircraft. We expect this year, between April 2022 to March 2023, inductions of about 46 to 52 aircraft, which is lesser than pre-COVID, but still a significant number. And we forecast the fleet to be around 718 to 724 aircraft by the end of FY23. And that will be slightly higher than pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, the Indian Airlines had a fleet of about 700 aircraft. Will be largely, marginally higher than that number by the end of this year. In terms of aircraft order book, remains strong, led by Indigo. Indigo has the highest order book of more than 540 aircraft, followed by SpiceJet Go First, and CASA also has placed a big order recently. So in total, we have more than 900 aircraft on order. One thing that was important for us to note here, and the initiatives that the industry has taken during the last 2 years, they have modernized their fleet. So the share of re-engined fleet between March 2022 and March 2021 has improved significantly. For example, Indigo had 57% NEOs in their fleet, and now they have, by March 2022, they had 73% NEOs in their fleet. Go Air improved from 84% to 90%, and similarly, other carriers also followed the same suit. In terms of financials, the industry will continue to struggle with respect to profitability, but the revenue is expected to be higher than pre-COVID, largely on account of recovery in domestic traffic and a significant recovery in international traffic as well. But the international traffic is, like I said, will still be lower than pre-COVID. But another significant factor that will contribute to slightly higher revenue than pre-COVID is the higher airfares, because fuel and other costs are high currently. The airlines are trying to pass on some of that cost to passengers in terms of higher fares, and therefore their passenger revenue is expected to be higher than pre-COVID, of which about 13% will be contributed by cargo and ancillaries, and about 86% will be the passenger revenue contribution. In terms of cost, that remains challenging. The cost will also be, while the revenue is also high, the cost will also be higher than pre-COVID. Largely, if we look at some of the important cost items, the fuel cost is something that is 137% of pre-COVID level. So if pre-COVID level was 100, this year on a per unit basis, we estimate the fuel to be 37% expensive on a per unit basis compared to pre-COVID levels. The labor cost is slightly, the per unit cost for labor cost is slightly lesser, but again, the maintenance cost also is very high. Airport charges remain largely in line with pre-COVID levels, but at an overall level, the CASK of the industry, the per unit cost, operating cost of the industry, is forecast to be about 15% higher than pre-COVID levels in FY 2023. Now, this revenue and operating cost forecast translates to about 126 billion profit before taxes for the industry, which is a significant improvement, but a still significant loss in terms of both absolute as well as on a per passenger basis. So a loss of 126 billion rupees translates to about 815 rupees per pax. So every passenger that the industry will carry, they will lose about $10. For airports, the story is slightly different. The impact on airports was significant, but not as significant as on airlines. The the revenue fell from 231 billion rupees to 95, and it is expected to almost recover to pre-COVID levels to about 218 billion this financial year, of which about 34% will be aeronautical revenue and 29% will be non-aero. The other revenue will contribute about 20%, and the revenue from ANS, which is only for Airport Authority of India, the largest airport operator in India, owned by the government. They also provide ANS services, so that stream itself will contribute about 15%. The other category also includes for Airport Authority of India, the revenue share that they receive from private airports. So in total, the aeronautical revenue for the industry is estimated to recover to about 88% of pre-COVID level this year. And the non-aeronautical revenue is also estimated to be recovered to around similar levels, about 90%. In terms of cost, the operating expenditure of Indian airports is largely fixed in nature. So that's why we see that between 20 and 21, there was not such a significant dip. The blue portion of the bar represents their normal operating expenditures to run day-to-day operations of an airport, and the yellow is the revenue share that private airport operators pay to Airport Authority of India, which is linked to the revenue that they generate. Now, when in 2021, when the revenue dried up, the revenue share portion also went down, but the other operating expenses didn't go by a significant amount. And similarly, next year also, we estimate the operating cost to be slightly higher than pre-COVID at about 110 billion. And revenue share will also be close to pre-COVID levels, of which employee salary will continue to remain as one of the significant cost item for airports, followed by the revenue share that they give, and repairs and maintenance and utility cost. In terms of absolute profit or loss before taxes, the airports are expected to report 33 billion profit before taxes this year. Basically, they will return to profitability this year, and they will generate about 128 rupees on a per pax basis in total. Now, finally, summarizing what I have said, I said that domestic traffic we forecast to be in the range of 130 to 140. The international traffic will be about 55 to 60. In terms of financials, about $1.5 billion loss in the industry. The assumptions that we have factored in is $100 per barrel for crude, and currency we have taken at about 78.80. The fare caps have already been removed, which has led to a 10% decline in fare levels during Q2 as compared to Q1, and it is expected to remain the same in Q3 as well. The airports are expected to generate a modest profit of 420 million. And if the revenue share of 21 and 22 is to be paid in 23, then the industry may actually end up just breaking even, not making profits. So what happened during COVID, like you may know, airports reached to courts that they don't want to, there should be no revenue share during that period, and there was some stay that some relief that the court had provided them. If the decision comes out that in Airport Authority of India's favor and they have to make those payments, then they may not report that profit that we just saw. In terms of fleet, like I said, we expect about 40 to 50 net inductions. The financing for fleet will continue to be challenged because the industry is struggling, and the capital that was available maybe 18 months ago is not so easily available right now. The industry will require recapitalization of about $2 billion. Up to 1.4 billion requirement can be easily raised, but $800 million may be difficult to find. ECLGS of up to 1,000 crores has been applied by SpiceJet, and I think some amount of that they have already received, about 150 crores. We expect the industry to go through consolidation. Like, Tata's have acquired Air India, and other smaller carriers are struggling. Indigo remains strong, but if between Tata's and Indigo, they capture about 80% of the market share of the domestic market, there's only 20% market share that is available for 4 other large carriers, which makes it very difficult for them in terms of operating environment. So we expect to at present, consolidation basically around 3 major players in each segment is what we are estimating in terms of competition. So we expect the airline industry game to be between 2 players, like I said, Indigo and Tata. For airport, between GMR and Adani's, a third may emerge, but as of now, it remains between the 2 large players. And similarly for ground handling, MROs, and distribution also, it remains a game between 2 to 3 large players. For the airlines, this post-COVID phase is characterized by a very hostile cost environment, increased competition, and tough economic conditions, a combination that will prove highly challenging for the industry. So that's what I had in terms of our views. Now I think we can open up for questions. Gautam, back to you, I think.
Yes. So what I'll do is quickly go on to the questions because we've got quite a few of them. I'll start with Rakesh Gupta. His question is, helicopter sector in India is seeing a mix of pilot errors, poor machine maintenance, and a weak regulatory framework. What is being done to correct these issues? Amit.
Right. Yeah. So I think I was on mute. So helicopter environment, I think generally that has been the issue with general aviation in India. There has been no such significant effort either from the government side or private investment side to improve the sector in terms of investment, also training as well, regulatory framework as well. So I don't see any, although the National Civil Aviation Policy was a significant step, an important step in the right direction for the aviation industry in general. But I agree that there's a lot that needs to be done or should be done for GA as well, including the helicopter sector. But I'm not aware of any, any such significant measure that is happening currently from the government side.
Thank you. Arun is asking, elevated ATF prices is impacting earnings and liquidity profile of the airlines, while weaker rupee to dollar will rise input costs. How are airlines tackling such headwinds?
So, Arun, like I said in my presentation also, the cost environment is definitely significantly impacted because of high ATF prices. They have although come down from to the level from the levels of $120, $125 to about 90 currently, but they still remain significantly higher than pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, the crude oil prices used to be around $70 per barrel. It has had a significant impact on the profitability. Like I said, the industry lost about $3.3 billion in the last financial year, which is a significant amount. We used to lose money pre-COVID also. That's a different story. But this high ATF price and weaker, rupee has added to the airline challenges significantly. Now, in terms of tackling the industry, maybe is slightly late. The players that were stronger pre-COVID remained stronger during this period, but the players that entered COVID, on a weaker financial position, and I don't want to name carriers, but most of the small carriers were financially weak even before COVID. So they obviously found it difficult to raise money during COVID because the environment was uncertain, challenging, and most challenging for the aviation sector. But the strong players actually took some measures to raise their liquidity. Some of them tried to do IPOs during this period. They also tried to do QIPs, but I think two successful measures I would say was raising loans is what the industry tried, because pre-COVID, if you look at airlines balance sheet, they did not have a significant amount of loans compared to airports. The leverage on balance sheet in terms of loans was slightly lower, and now it has gone up. So they have reached out to banks and raised money. They have also tried to do SLB transactions on their own assets. So airlines which had aircraft owned by them, they did SLBs to raise some liquidity. So these are some of the measures they tried, but like I started my response, they were late. So the efforts were, or the measures was not significant to the level required.
Thank you so much. Aarti is asking a pertinent sub question, because I also came across a few articles where because Jet also coming back into the industry, they're also mass hiring, along with SpiceJet also facing issues. Plus Indigo had like a big fallout when I think half of their employees fell unwell or sick, due to which they had a shortage as well. So the question is, how are Indian airlines gearing up to prepare for the talent war?
I think so. The previous question was also, how is the industry trying to cope up with liquidity measures, and this also is what is the industry doing for talent war. And maybe there could be 10-15 other such important issues that the industry need to gear up for, but we don't see the industry taking any concrete measures to address these issues, because currently they are still struggling with the challenges posed by COVID. They are still looking at recovery, aircraft inductions, trying to reduce their liabilities, trying to meet their vendor payments on time, etc., etc. Except the large carriers who had enough liquidity, like Indigo had about 20,000 crore on their balance sheet in cash, both restricted and non-restricted before COVID. So they were obviously placed better. But and now I think the Air India Group has Tata Group backing, but other carriers are not so financially strong. So they're finding day-to-day activities difficult. So where is the time for them to look at or prepare in advance for things like this? So we don't see that the industry is doing much. During COVID, the talent became actually in abundance. Both pilots and technical and non-technical staff was available because Jet had closed in FY19. So there were a lot of resources available from that carrier. Then during COVID, the airlines which were operational also fired people. So they thought when the recovery happens, they will have talent available. But no one knew that while the recovery is happening, not just they will need talent, the airlines that are coming up or starting afresh, like Akasa and Jet is also coming up, they will also need talent, and Air India will be privatized and they will also start growing. So they will also need talent. So there is definitely a talent crunch in the industry, both technical, non-technical, and the industry needs to prepare for it, but we don't see any significant efforts. Pre-COVID, I think on the pilot front, airlines had cadet programs, and the government also invested, I think, marginal sum of about 50 crore for aviation training in the country, establishing a training hub in the country, but not enough, not significant.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amit. I'll move on to the next question. It's an anonymous attendee saying that what are the emerging trends in demand for air travel in the Indian market?
So emerging trends, I know that's a very open-ended question. So is it referring to recovery? Is it referring to within which segment the demand is recovering faster, etc.? But I'll try to answer it. So in terms of absolute recovery or absolute traffic trends I covered in my presentation, we expect the domestic traffic to recover fully to pre-COVID levels this financial year in FY23, which means we are talking about of 130 to 140 million passengers for airlines and 270 million passengers for airports. On the international front, because the market has opened very late recently, most major markets in international countries were closed and scheduled services have started, but not to the level of pre-COVID. So we expect on international recovery next financial year in FY 2024, and then we see growth happening from there. If we look at the tourism trends, inbound has already recovered to about 80% of pre-COVID levels, FTAs, foreign tourist arrivals to India. So the tourism trends also look pretty strong. But there are still some countries on the international front like China and Hong Kong, which have not opened, and they used to contribute pretty significantly. China alone used to account for about 300,000 FTAs to India. So there are some markets which are taking time, and that's why we estimate the international traffic to recover next year, not this year, by FY 2024, unless COVID brings us some new challenges. So yeah, I think that's what I had on demand.
No, I think very well covered also. So Lynn has quite a few interesting questions. I'll touch upon them first. He has three questions. First is, what is the expected benefit from fuel hedging as compared to without fuel hedging, considering fuel costs in India? Number two is, what are the costs involved with safety risks post-COVID, and how are these being tackled? And number three is, what would be the expected savings in cost by moving on to a digital supply chain in aviation?
Right. So the first one is on fuel hedging. So it's the first of all, I think Indian carriers, none of them do fuel hedging. The level of expertise that is required to do hedging is pretty significant, and I don't think it exists with the airlines currently, and they have not invested in that direction. But even the carriers who do fuel hedging, the global carriers, American carriers or European carriers, which attempt to do fuel hedging, lost a significant amount of money, especially during COVID. So nothing was happening in line with their expectations. So there is no hard and fast, evidence in favor of hedging as such. One, because the expertise required is not there in our market. Second, people who have tried have not consistently succeeded at saving cost. I remember reading about American Airlines. Some of them, they lost about 50% higher in terms of their fuel expenses because they had hedged their fuel contracts. So it is not simple. Even if the industry wants to do it, I think they will find it challenging. So expected benefit, I mean, no one knows. If you do it right, obviously there are benefits, but if you do it wrong, there can be significant higher costs as well. What are the costs involved with safety risks post-COVID, and how are these being tackled? So with respect to safety, I think it's a pretty serious matter for the industry in terms of, the regulator takes it very seriously, and the airlines also take it very seriously. So there are defined SOPs, guidelines that the regulator approves and the airline follows. The OEMs also are pretty stringent about what maintenance checks, whether protocols are followed properly or not. Lessors also keep a tab on airlines whether their aircrafts are maintained properly or not. So There is obviously significant amount of cost associated with it, and the industry is very particular, both the players and the regulator, that there is no compromise in that direction. But during COVID, obviously, like we have already discussed, the airlines were going through financial challenges. But in addition to that, the entire fleet of airline was grounded. So when the government imposed restrictions on air travel, all aircraft were grounded. The grounded aircraft is not like a normal asset. They still need maintenance. So the airlines maintained those aircraft as per the SOPs. But when you bring them back into service, then they again need the specified level of maintenance with it. So during COVID, what was happening is the industry was recovering. The airlines were not using all of their aircraft. So they were kind of rotating the aircraft in a manner that, the maintenance events can be postponed to as much as possible, because they were trying to save, conserve cash. Now, they may have tried to rotate spare parts within the aircraft, there is nothing wrong about it. It is allowed, but that's not an ideal thing to do. But now I think those things are, you can't do that anymore, because the industry, at least in terms of domestic, has recovered fully, and you're using all your aircraft. So you need to spend, in terms of maintenance, whatever you saved during 21 or maybe the later half of 2022, you need to undergo those activities now. So there was always cost with respect to safety taken very seriously. And I think during COVID, they may have postponed a little bit of it. And I think now they are going through it. I think there was one more: what is being done to manage disruptions and increase network profitability. I mean, network profitability is something that all airlines aspire for. But even during pre-COVID, I don't think the industry was successful in doing it. Now, there are challenges that are internal to airlines. If you are cost inefficient, if you have your network designed poorly, if you don't invest in IT and don't outsource the right level of services, try to do everything in-house, which is not cost efficient, then you are obviously bound to not make money. So there are a lot of factors that contribute to it. But in addition to internal measures that the airlines can take, there are a lot of external factors that also impact the industry, like we discussed. I mean, you do whatever. If the crude oil is $130, I think there is no way you can make money. And that's why the industry is losing money. Now, while the internal, you can still attempt to be cost efficient, at least some players, like LCCs like Indigo, they are doing a good job in terms of being cost efficient. And they tried to induct more fuel efficient aircraft during this period, during COVID, so that their costs can be further reduced in terms of fuel, in terms of maintenance, and they provide better services to passengers, etc. But what can you do about external factors? What can you do about rupee depreciating and therefore impacting your maintenance cost, therefore impacting your lease rental cost, and therefore increasing your fuel bill as well, and the fuel cost itself going up? So these external factors are not in their hand. So to manage disruptions, I think they can't do anything about external factors. Internally, they may be making some marginal improvements, and network profitability, I think, is a result of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll quickly move on to the other questions before I come back to the last question by Lynn. Question is, what initiatives would contribute immensely to drive sustainable growth of the MRO sector? Understanding that MRO has mainly been in the import side of it, how can we indigenize this area? We would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, first of all, I think the capability needs to be there, private investment needs to be there. But before that, I think the government needs to make some changes. And I think they have taken some positive steps. The tax benefits, the focus that the government has shown recently in terms of their, whether it is PLI scheme or tax breaks that they are giving to MRO providers, etc., etc. So, like, things are happening, but are nearby hubs are, I think, pretty strong in terms of providing MRO services. They have the right level of expertise. The Indian Airlines depend on not just their internal capabilities, but they rely for complex checks on the global players. So until that keeps happening, I think the MRO sector will keep struggling. But we have seen, I think, positive improvement recently, but it will take time before we can compete with the global players.
Thank you. Let's hope for the same as well.
Yeah.
Rishabh is asking, I think from the logistics point of view, he's saying, can you shed some light on how air freight market is performing in India?
So air freight, so there are two angles to it. One is when you say freight, if you're referring to dedicated freighters, I think there are not. Blue Dart is there, but apart from that, there is no significant player in India who has dedicated freight services. But if you factor in, or if you're talking about the air freight movement that happens on the passenger aircraft, the belly space of passenger aircraft. So during COVID, when all other modes of transportation were impacted, so people were not certain with respect to road transportation, whether one state will allow entry to the vehicle into other state, what COVID checks will they do, and the movement itself was restricted. So some of that freight had moved to air. So air cargo actually was a savior for airlines during this period. They tried to use some of their passenger aircraft for freight and make as much revenue as possible. So there was a very positive momentum both in terms of volume and pricing for air freight during COVID. But that, I think, now when things are recovering to pre-COVID levels, the capacity. So one major factor during COVID was the capacity was also limited. There were very limited passenger aircraft movements that were happening. So when the capacity is less and the demand remains strong, so your pricing also improved and the industry made some money. But now when the passenger aircraft have come back, the belly capacity has come back, the pricing is also normalizing, reaching their pre-COVID levels. And I think the extra momentum in terms of volume that was there because of two main reasons. One, there was a lot of pharmaceutical and e-commerce movement that was happening during COVID. People only had online platforms to purchase. So e-commerce had a positive push and they generally prefer air freight. Then other modes of transportation were impacted and that was also moving to air. So there was a positive movement on volume. But now other modes have also kind of resumed normalcy. So that factor is no longer there. And the pharma movement that was happening during COVID, that also has kind of moved back to normalcy. So the volume also is moving to pre-COVID kind of levels. So that momentum, I think, didn't continue or is not continued currently. So we are again, with respect to cargo, moving back to what we were seeing pre-COVID.
Thank you. Question has come, is wet leasing aircraft a good choice for Indian Airlines? I believe Indigo has been doing this, but what are your thoughts?
So generally, wet leasing is not something that airlines plans in terms of their long-term planning. It is generally a step that is taken to fill any short-term gap in capacity or any sudden capacity induction that the airline may want to do. So during COVID, some of the airlines may have taken this call because these Vande Bharat flights were happening and there were international opportunities, both short haul, long haul. While the airlines had aircraft to do long haul international, not a lot of airlines had aircraft to do long haul routes. So they may have taken some aircraft on wet leasing and tried to do that. But that's not a cost efficient way of doing things. It is expensive.
Thank you. I'll move on to another question by Fani Raj, saying, although India providently procured oil from Russia at lower rates, why it doesn't reflect at the end consumer?
Right, because I think it was a very small proportion of the overall import that we do. I don't exactly remember Russia contributes what, but I think it doesn't represent a significant proportion of our total oil import bill. Most of it comes from Middle Eastern markets, and that's why we are not seeing any significant impact. And I think Russia did not commit a significant volume to us also.
Thank you. So I'll just move on to the last question by Lynn. He's saying, what would be the expected savings in cost by moving on to a digital supply chain in aviation?
So digital, I think, has been you can say one important. So even pre-COVID, industry wanted to move to digital and wanted to invest in digital, but they were very, like not minimal, but not so significant efforts that were happening. And during COVID, I think the entire world, I wouldn't say realized, I think they were pushed towards, doing things digitally, because there was no other way. There was no other way to shop. There was no other way to do meetings. There was no other way to attend offices, etc. And for airlines also, I think they were also wanting to invest in digital, because as much as passenger or human intervention is there was a risk of infections, COVID infections, etc. So they try to do digital yatra, digital passenger check-in, digital airport movements, etc., so that passengers feel safe. Now, in terms of overall theme or overall investment, while the airline wanted to move in that direction, there was no money for them with them to take significant steps, and they only did whatever minimal was required on the front end side of things. On the back end side, I think there was too little strategic bandwidth that was available with them to make any significant investment. So on the supply chain side, I don't think they made any significant improvement. On the passenger side, they had to, because COVID demanded that. But going forward, we see the industry investing significantly on digital front, because we always say, you can keep improving in terms of your costs. And one critical factor in terms of being cost efficient is investing in technology, doing things digitally, not traditionally. So they will invest, and the digital sector will continue to see significant growth, because especially the airlines in our region, including India, are not as digitally savvy compared to what we see in the Western markets, European markets, and American markets. So we will see growth going forward over the next 10 to 15 years, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amit. Such an insightful and engaging session, and a privilege to hear you. And also thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the end, and for always sharing excellent questions. Hope Amit and the audience enjoyed this session, and looking forward to more such conversations.
Thank you, Gautam, for having me, and thank you, audience, for asking questions and attending this session.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali to you and everyone in the audience.